So before we go into and dive into all that, I would just like to briefly talk about the seamless experience we as engineers had installing Isla into our environment. We place this into a small area of the network. We are planning to roll it out to a larger portion of our environment through GPO and Active Directory. But as at its base layer, it really broke down to three things for us: setting up the proxy settings in Windows through a pack file provided to us by the CyberInc engineers, downloading trusted certificates from CyberInc, and then logging in, provisioning a user account that was assigned a policy of what could be done and what cannot be done. So one of the things we're going to do is I'm going to go ahead and pass this over to John. And we're going to have a bit of an interactive conversation here. But John, go ahead and talk through some of the basics of why or what Isla does.
Thanks, Josh. So yeah, before we kind of get into the really sexy nitty gritty of all the cool features that Isla has, I did want to touch on this because this is such a crucial component from a blue team kind of security posture perspective, and that's content filtering. So this is something that is included with the Isla product. When you're building your policies, you have a huge list of content categories. The picture here just shows a small snippet, but you're allowed to filter the types and categories of websites that you want or don't want your users to be able to access. And there's a ton of benefits just to doing this. First and foremost, there's the productivity aspect of it. You know, you can prevent your employees from visiting, video streaming sites, social media sites, gambling sites, gaming sites. Like there's so many things just from a productivity standpoint that this alone will solve. Additionally, you can block a lot of different malicious categories of sites. So even if the user clicks on the link, they're not going to be able to go to it at all, and the thread is stopped right there. Kind of a great anecdote that I like to tell regarding this is back when I was an analyst at my previous employer was a large MSSP, and one of our clients was a very large municipality. They had tens of thousands of endpoints, and we, for a time, there was a couple months stretch where we were just getting bombarded with malware alerts from their endpoint detection, dealing with fake flash download or fake flash players, all types of like media kind of downloads. And what we realized is this is back when Game of Thrones was actually a good show, and people were wanting to hop on all of these free streaming sites, which we all know can host a lot of malware, and people were getting conned basically into downloading these fake streaming pieces of software. So finally, that client implemented a content policy at the firewall level, and immediately we saw a huge drop in malware alerts. And what this does from an analyst perspective is it frees you up to really threat hunt and be proactive in your security instead of just being bombarded with a lot of mundane tickets for malware that never should have been there in the first place. So moving on from that, wanted to do just another brief overview of the common browser-based attacks. And even before I get into this, I did want to pause really quickly and give a shout out to the guys at CyberInc and Isla. They really put their money where their mouth was when they let us deploy this technology in the range. Like, we effectively threw the kitchen sink at it, and as you'll see, it did an outstanding job of preventing all sorts of browser-based attacks. So, all right, moving on from that. So on the left-hand side, you're going to see the types of attacks that you can find in a browser-based attack, and on the right-hand column, you see what Isla does, effectively nullifying that attack. So in the context of a multi-stage payload in the form of a .zip archive or .exe, there's several ways that Isla can handle this. We saw it just straight up block the connection to the site, so no download occurred. or also in your policy, like I was showing before, where you can do the content filtering, you as an administrator can also prevent downloads of different file types. So in our policy, actually, at the CyberInc, we just have you cannot download .exe or .zip files. So any attempt to do so is immediately stopped, and those files don't even touch the endpoint, thereby rendering the attack benign. The second bullet there is a malicious document download, extremely common in phishing attacks. One of the easiest ways for attackers to get footholds in an environment is to trick a user into opening a malicious Word document that has a macro with embedded PowerShell or VB script, which then executes a series of commands to download additional malware. One amazing feature of Isla that effectively nullifies this is anytime you try to open a link where you download a document, it actually renders it into a safe preview. It strips away all of the potentially malicious code and just gives you actually a benign PDF file to look at. And we'll actually see more of that in just a minute. And finally, we have a fake login page for credential harvesting, also very common in phishing. This is an easy way for the bad guys to get credentials, to gain footholds and exploit an organization. And one thing that the Isla platform does is it renders sites in read-only mode. And this, it was kind of funny when we were testing this out. Like, even though you see the login portal, if you click in there as a user, like I couldn't give my credentials if I wanted to. It was a really neat thing to see in action. So here we kind of we knew the demo gods might not be too kind to us, so we wanted to make sure that we caught screenshots of some of the experimentation we did. We set up a fake email account in Office 365, crafted a bunch of various phishing emails with links to malicious sites. And here's the results. So up here, one of the emails we had was to a fake banking site, and Isla effectively flagged this URL as malicious and wouldn't even let us go to the site, so completely nullified the attack there. Because Isla strips away all of the JavaScript from a page, all of the really intrusive, invasive tracking effectively gets stripped away. And we actually went to a site to verify this. You know, is your browser blocking tracking ads? Yes, it is. Is your browser blocking invisible trackers? Yes, it is. So it, you know, passed with flying colors as far as that went. We had another fake page here. It was a combination of trying to download a zip file and also kind of credential harvesting. And this was a case here where you can see page rendered as read-only due to suspected risk. So you can still view the page, but nothing on it was really clickable, effectively nullifying any other malicious links that were embedded. And then finally, in the top right here, we had an example where we took a link that was associated with Emotet, which Josh will go into more detail in just a second. But effectively what it has you do is download a malicious Word document that's embedded with a whole bunch of nasty PowerShell, and all sorts of bad things happen in your computer. In this case, we can actually see the end result where we have our safe preview in our benign PDF file. And like I said, we will show an example of that in real time in just a second, but wanted to give you guys a little teaser. And with that, I'll turn it back over to Josh, and he's going to kind of explain what Emotet is.
Yeah, so, and I think one of the things we should emphasize is that as all of that was happening and the pages were getting blocked or we were getting passed on to view the page in a read-only preview, the knowing of if Isla was there and operating, you'd only know if you looked at the tab and you saw the star that said, okay, this is going through an Isla viewer. Otherwise, you did not know from an end user perspective that Isla was running. unless you were provided with the, hey, this is a block page. So why did we choose Emotet? Before, there was talk about different types of variants of ransomware. We talked about malvertising campaigns and all of that. We decided to throw Emotet because not only is there browser-borne based attacks that Emotet has begun to show, but Emotet has also been used by different threat actors to introduce other types of malware into an environment. So your infection may start with Emotet and end with GanCrab or end with X type of ransomware or other type of attacks in your environment, because the authors and the threat group behind Emotet actually, in many cases, give access to other attackers to do what they want to do within an environment. Emotet is not so much malware as a service, but they have begun to function in that space. And the reason for that is because of how sophisticated this Trojan is. First recorded in 2014, but has gained continually advanced capabilities over the course of its lifetime. So how has it done this? Well, one is through its polymorphic design. It changes its code to bypass signature-based detection and to evade security controls that run on the endpoint. One of the means that it does this is through living off the land measures, but furthermore, knowing what it is that endpoint security controls are looking for. There are different types of advanced persistence measures that are established. It can act like a worm. So think think about wormable ransomware, right? Emotet functions in the same way, in that it's not only looking to infect one endpoint, but it's also looking to move laterally and into other areas of your network to further propagate. Who has it targeted? Well, their focuses have not only been in America, but they've also had different organizations they've targeted in Europe and Canada. They've gone after the government. They've gone after corporations, small businesses, as well, individuals. So go with Emotet as well. There are significant consequences as it relates to the loss of private data, the inability to operate your PC after the infection. There is going to be financial losses when you have to restore your damaged infrastructure. Government reports have stated that it has cost up to $1 million per incident to remediate from Emotet. So the delivery of it, as most malware or ransomware is delivered, typically through malicious email spam campaigns. That's how we emulated that for ourselves, by sending ourselves that malicious link to download a malicious document. And then with the macros in those document files, VBA code runs and no user interaction is necessary. So if you did not have Isla to provide you a safe preview and a user downloaded a malicious document, it would in fact begin to infect your environment. So I know we've provided screenshots, we've said all these cool things, but can you see it? And the answer is yes. John and I have access to an online application called Anyone, where we prefer to detonate live malware. The reason for this is, one, primarily because Emotet is very malicious, and we talked about its anti-evasion measures, and fortunately, or fortunately, unfortunately, however you view it, we have to keep the cyber range running. So I don't want to detonate something in my environment with the security controls I've established and pray to some deity that I'm not going to infect my whole self and then have to respond on my own. So John, let's go ahead and walk through the video and talk through the different types of execution that are occurring.
Absolutely. So yeah, but this video is basically going to show the detonation of the Word document. And this is, like I said, worst case scenario with no Isla isolation protection, no endpoint protection. And I think everybody will kind of be surprised at how quickly a complete compromise of the machine happens. So if I hit play here, we see Word opens. up here, because this is in a sandbox, you can kind of see what's running in the background. So PowerShell kicked off. It's already downloaded, called to a malicious domain, downloaded an executable. And then that has basically triggered another one. And double check the time here. Yeah, that's it. Pretty crazy how fast it is. Just looking, if you were a user just looking at this, like you wouldn't have seen all these pop-ups in the background. You would just be like, oh, what am I looking at here with this Word document, right? But in reality, I don't know how well this is coming through on the screen, but you can kind of see the process tree of everything that happened. You have your PowerShell with the encoded command, went ahead and downloaded all these executables. They embedded themselves and executed. You can see all the different malicious callouts it did here. So very fast, very nasty, and within 30 seconds, you had full compromise in the machine. If the malware executables that it downloaded exploited anything that is wormable, you can see it's kind of keep ticking on here, but
And I know there are probably people out there and amongst you who would say, well, I'll just block PowerShell execution on an endpoint. Well, we can tell you that there are means of bypassing PowerShell-based controls
absolutely.
to stop PowerShell execution. There are different profile policies and flags that you can give. That NOP right there is saying bypass what an administrator has set as a PowerShell execution policy. So even if you were to say, hey, that's great, I'll just block PowerShell on an endpoint. Well, you can still bypass that PowerShell policy that you've set up.
Mm-hmm.
So the execution is going to occur regardless of what you've done. And the reason for that is because, again, the PowerShell was intended to be used by administrators to administrate Windows endpoints. However, administrators in some ways need to bypass the controls that they've established to execute certain tasks in their environment. So if you captured a screenshot of those links we ask, please don't click on them. They are live IOCs and are malicious.
Very true. Very dangerous stuff. Yeah, that's why we did the sandbox. But just kind of a brief overview again of what we saw. So, the Emotet malware was downloaded through a malicious email or mail spam. The document that was downloaded was embedded with macros, and those macros downloaded additional payloads further compromising the host. So if this had happened in an enterprise environment, the SOC analyst would have to rely on properly implemented endpoint controls. And I can't emphasize enough on there should be a gigantic asterisk next to that because like Josh was mentioning earlier with the polymorphic nature of Emotet versus whether or not the endpoint protection actually has the proper policies put in place. The analyst may or may not even know something bad happened. I know back in the early days of ransomware, security analysts a lot of times had to wait until they got a phone call from the end user saying, hey, there's something on my screen that's not right. Like that would be our notification, not something in the SIM. So once this has happened, Emotet now has a foothold on the system. And like I was saying before, if it's exploiting something that's wormable, it's already pivoted and spread through your environment. So remediation now becomes a nightmare. You have to manually hunt everywhere that machine connected to. You have to isolate those machines. You have to re-image those machines. And verifying that this stuff is off of your network is an incredibly tedious, time-consuming, and expensive process. So actually, I'm going to go back here. We are now going to tempt the demo gods and do a live reenactment here. Let me log in. Hopefully I typed that long password in correctly. Okay. So interestingly enough, so like I was saying before, Josh and I, we crafted a bunch of emails. We went to kind of a lot of these like bleeding edge threat intel feeds, looking for the latest and greatest malware to really kind of push the limits of what Isla could do. And between the last week and now, a lot of them have actually been taken down. For example, this specific one here was a link to what we showed in the AnyRun example. But as you can see now, it's a kind of a page not found. It takes a minute to load here, but effectively not there anymore. So that being said, I was while Rajiv was presenting, and I had noticed this, I was so confident with Isla's protection that I literally went to AnyRun's Emotet hashtag page and started directly injecting Emotet malicious URLs, knowing that I would be protected. I can't stress enough how awesome that is to just be able to willy-nilly throw caution to the wind, go to a malicious site. So here you can see is a URL also linked to Emotet. And when I directly entered that into the browser, which I did here, I had to allow pop-ups, which I did, basically pretending to be, random user that will click anything. And what happened is it opened this page. You can see here with this extension, it's actually a .pdf, not a .doc Word document. And it has effectively nullified all of the malicious payload content in this document. So I, as a user, can actually see what would have been in the document without the negative side effect of having all that code run in the background. And even if I go here and look at the URL information, so one thing that I definitely wanted to point out that's really cool about this, and this kind of touches on what Rajiv was talking about with the zero trust, is when you look at this site, right, this is a realty page. It's even categorized as a realty page, and the threat score is below the threshold of something that it would consider actually malicious. These threat scores are very hard to get exactly right. There's always going to be mistakes, no matter who you use. But the amazing thing about Isla is even though this technically passed muster, it still didn't trust the document and did the safe render. I didn't have to tell it to do that. That's just part of what it does. So I was able to literally directly input a URL to one of the most nasty pieces of malware on the internet, knowing with full confidence that it would do the PDF render and my machine would be safe. And yeah, like I said, I can't stress enough how awesome that is. So, all right, let's back out of here. Give me 1 second, guys. I gotta slide this over. Exit here and go back to the presentation. So, okay. Back to my slideshow. So this kind of reiterates kind of what I talked about a second ago. So what happened with Isla Browser Isolation? The Word document rendered as a safe PDF. All of the embedded macros are removed and the document is defanged, making it no longer malicious. The infection is stopped at the browser. No malicious payloads were ever downloaded, thereby nullifying the attack. This is definitely what you would call proactive security in action. Having something like Isla, or I would actually say Isla specifically, as part of your layered defense strategy would drastically increase your security posture. And effectively what it's doing is defanging the single greatest risk to your organization, which is your users, because no matter how many times you tell them not to click those links, they're going to do it anyway. And with that, I will kick it over to Josh.
So we'll go through this real quick because I know we're probably up for time in our presentation, and Rajiv will dive deeper into it. But this is just a quick snapshot of the security dashboard. It shows that every source URL that we used and put into our web browser that was protected through the Isla isolation platform received a threat score of maliciousness and was categorized accordingly as either phishing and fraud. You see right there the BBVA. That was, John pointed out, is emulating a banking site. You see it is a phishing site that is in fact being used to capture user credentials for that banking site. So we'll go on and move to like our lessons learned. And so as earlier on, I spoke about how I've been in offensive security for several years, and I used to lead our offensive security services at Tech Data. From my perspective, I have a love-hate relationship with Isla. I told the guys, Tracy and Rajiv and some of the engineers this over at CyberInc about their product. I love you, but I hate you. Why? Well, you're going to make my job significantly harder for getting my initial foothold into an organization. When I was doing assessment services for large multinational banks and for the private sector and all of that, one of the primary means I gained access on an assessment was through phishing. Why go out and slam your head against the wall when you can ask someone for permission? You can tell a user to click on a link to enable macros to follow all the pop-ups, and they do. Why would I have to go through that process? This now puts me on my back foot, and now I have to figure out a new way and a new method into your environment. So it's going to render all my phishing pages as either blocked or read only. It's get my initial payloads to drop a malicious file onto a document to either laterally move or, like I said, gain that initial foothold into an environment is now going to be rendered useless because the documents are going to be what we call in cybersecurity defanged. So I'm going to spend more time not only bypassing the traditional endpoint controls, but now I have to also figure out how do I bypass these browser isolation controls that are in the environment. So you are going to make my life so much harder, and I love and hate you for it.
All right. And yeah, it's just a quick note from the security analyst perspective. Kind of the theme of this presentation we touched on a few times is this technology brings prevention back into the conversation. We no longer are on our back foot dealing with, how quickly can we remediate the breach? We can actually prevent a lot of breaches from happening again. And I would say that when you combine this with a well-rounded defense in depth and zero trust strategy, this tool is absolutely an effective solution with the ability to protect your environment from the dangers of user behavior. Like I said before, your users are generally the biggest threat in your environment. And specifically from a security analyst perspective, I can tell you that with 100% confidence that a tool like Isla will greatly reduce the amount of noise received in the SIM, which is the main kind of alert dashboard that security analysts use, because users will no longer be downloading pups, which are potentially unwanted programs, maybe not necessarily malicious, but it's still something you as an analyst have to take action on anyway, which is just adding tedium to your day-to-day. And also, like we saw with the demo, definitely blocks malicious payloads. And this allows your analyst to spend more time on being proactive, doing things like system hardening, doing things like threat hunting, really kind of looking for those things that are few and far between that might slip through the cracks that are major threats to your organization. And these are things that are impossible to do as an analyst if you're being bombarded with that noise. And with that, I believe that is the end of our presentation.